Welcome back. Today we're reading Chapter 5. Invisible Sleuth. Scarlet erased the adventure of her dream and its startling results from her mind and concentrated on the housing problem. Her series of forecasting dreams apparently had ended, and she spent a peaceful night envisioning the children of the slum district romping around their new dwellings, enjoying safety and security. Meanwhile, Cecil Strike, the man who owned nearly all the rundown property, was congratulating himself for his success in making city officials do as he wished. He sat in his upholstered swivel chair in his real estate office, lit a fat black cigar, unbuttoned his vest, swung his short legs up to rest his feet on the highly polished desk, and tilted back comfortably. He smiled to himself as thoughts of his success floated through his head. Ha! That was a worthwhile investment I put into a few apartments. When the committee of investigators came out to inspect the apartments, I showed only those I had improved. A good sales talk did the rest, he boasted. He hoisted himself out of the chair, buttoned his vest, put on his coat, and wandered around the room, admiring his luxuriously furnished office. He walked over to the window and looked out. The real estate building was a cozy brick bungalow, and the grounds were landscaped with spruce trees and a circular fountain. He nodded his head in satisfaction in the direction of his costly limousine, which was parked at the curb. Then he voiced his thoughts aloud again. Those old buildings are making me rich. I bought them for a song, and now, with the housing shortage, there's not a vacant apartment. There's practically no upkeep on them, and I'm getting good rent. The people complain that I don't repair and redecorate the buildings, but let them complain. As long as the housing committee is satisfied, I have nothing to worry me. His teeth clenched down hard on his cigar as he added, They can't move. There's nowhere they can go. If I hadn't repaired and improved a few of the buildings, though, the city would have condemned the property, and then I'd been in a fix. A sudden thought struck him. He grabbed his hat and rushed out the door. Say, that reminds me. I'll bet I can get more rent from the tenants in those buildings. Think I'll try anyway. Scarlet O'Neil, back in her own apartment, had the same tenants and the same property on her mind. She was looking at the situation from a decidedly suspicious angle. But so far, she could think of no solution. Those city investigators must have been blind not to see any reason for condemning Strike's property, she told herself. A vision of Charles Dew's plans came to her again, and her heart ached when she thought of the young architect's life work being thrown into the discard. She knew the mayor had been pleased and enthusiastic about the project, but he was powerless. to act after the investigators had reported. Every building is a fire hazard and an insult to the integrity of the people who live in them, Scarlet said as she jumped up from the sofa and reached for her hat and coat. She had dilly-dallied over the problem long enough, and the time had come for her to act, she reminded herself, solemnly. I'm going to look into this further and see if I can solve the problem for Charles, she vowed. She knew that by possessing the strange power of making herself invisible, she had a big advantage over any other person who might want to investigate the situation. And she was determined to use that gift. She pressed the nerve in her left wrist to make herself disappear from sight, and then walked out, smiling grimly and thinking, Mr. Strike is going to have an unseen visitor. She had no trouble finding the snug little bungalow office of the real estate operator, and she thought bitterly how much it differed from the dwellings of his tenants. Scarlet searched through the various offices and discovered that Mr. Strike was not in. She decided to wait until he came back. She sat in an easy chair and waited patiently. Meanwhile, Cecil Strike headed for one of the places where he had fixed up to show the city investigators. A rather startled young housewife answered the bell to her apartment a short while later. Good afternoon. How are my fine tenants? Mr. Strike asked, trying to sound hearty and affable. He removed his hat and looked around the room, while the tenant watched him apprehensively. What is it, Mr. Strike? She asked, but he ignored the query. Say, the place looks nice since I had it decorated, doesn't it? He demanded as he peered into the next room. The housewife returned to the sink, where she resumed her task of washing the dishes. She paused a moment before answering. Well, it's an improvement which certainly was necessary, she said. Yes, sirree. You folks are mighty lucky. If I were renting this place now, I could get $60 a month instead of $40. Yep, easy, he observed and watched for her reaction. Oh, the tenant thought to herself. Aloud, she said stiffly, You forgot you made only surface improvements, Mr. Strike. $40 is high rent for this place. The beefy landlord glared at her and slammed out of the building. He was still angry when he re-entered his office, where invisible Scarlet O'Neil awaited him in silence. Bah, I couldn't get any more rent from my tenants. Ungrateful, that's what they are. Ungrateful, he snarled. I fixed up the apartments, and what do I get for it? Nothing. But maybe I shouldn't complain. He grinned wickedly and flicked the ash from his cigar. I had to repair and decorate those few buildings to convince the investigators they were all structurally sound and livable anyway. He chuckled. Scarlet, who had been listening closely, almost gasped aloud in amazement. He fixed a drink for himself and added, That committee is really sold on them now. I have nothing to fear. So that's it. He repaired
just a few of the buildings, and the investigators didn't bother to look at the rest.
Scarlet thought to herself. I wonder what she's up to. Join me next time when we read Chapter 6, An Uninvited Guest. Thank you for watching. See you next time.